Hi there, I'm Dr. Karin Hendricks.
And I'm Dr. Tawnya Smith.
And we are so sorry that we can't be with you in person this summer, but we are here at our home south of Boston putting together this video for you based on our research. Here's one book, Performance Anxiety Strategies, and here's another, Compassionate Music Teaching, with some ideas for you about supportive environments from internal dialogue to the rehearsal space.
So we're going to start first by talking about managing self-talk. This is an important thing for a lot of us, especially those of us who tend to have music performance anxiety.
Before we go, it's great to kind of understand that we have different levels of mind as humans. This is an awesome thing where maybe unlike our pet and animal friends, we have an ability to think a little bit more. Now, for all we know, our animal friends have some magical powers, but as far as we know, this is something we as humans underestimate exactly how much we have the ability to manage our thoughts. So the first level of mind we might think about is the back brain. Maybe you've heard the term amygdala. We have a lizard brain, or the same kind of ideas and thoughts that a lizard might have, where we can respond to any sort of danger without even thinking about it, really. That's where fight, flight, and freeze come from. Maybe you've heard of those terms. So that's the first level of mind. As humans, though, we have this ability in the front of our brains to think a little bit beyond that and be able to understand or have awareness of what's going on around us. We can also think about the future, and we can think about the past, which is one reason that we are blessed with the gift of performance anxiety, because we are able to remember things that maybe weren't so cool and compare them to things that we're afraid might happen in the future. So even though this can be a good thing because we can think a little bit more about events happening around us.
And we know we need to practice, maybe?
Yeah, right. We might get stuck in a pattern that is not healthy for us. So that's the great thing. The third level of mind, which we will call overmind, is our ability to think about our own thinking. Metacognition is another term we might use, where we can actually stop and say, wait, what is this thought I'm having? And why am I having this thought? And do I want to have this thought? That's where the power comes, that we can actually think about our own thinking. So with that in mind.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about my research that I have done. I did a study with some undergrad students who said, yeah, I am totally nervous or have music performance anxiety, especially when I improvise. And like a lot of classically trained musicians, we don't necessarily always do a lot of improvisation. Some of our teachers have actually encouraged us not to do a lot of improvising. So, to try to get over that so that we can, be freer as musicians, I was really curious about that. Well, one thing I noticed is that as I was trying to understand what was going on in people's thinking, so I was trying to understand exactly what sort of thoughts people were having, there were these three characters that tended to show up. And I'm going to introduce those to you by taking on roles for a minute. So if you'll just allow me to do that. Here's the first one. Oh, that sucked. That was horrible. I never practiced enough. Who am I kidding? And here's the second character. I should probably warm up a little bit more before I try playing in that range. My tone is better today. Okay, I have about 2 weeks for the recital. I need to make sure I spend more time on that technical passage. Oh, nice. I really love how I'm shaping that phrase. And here's the third character. So a flow state. where we're not really even thinking, we're just creating the music that we love. We're almost like channeling a musical energy. That's the reason we do this. That's why we want to do this. That's why we spend so many hours practicing, because of those wonderful moments where it's just happening. And we are just truly enjoying what we're doing. Now, one thing that I wanted to, you can flip to the next slide. All of those sorts of three characters are one thing, but if we think about that metacognition or the overmind that Karin was just talking about, I labeled that the observer witness. So you can see this picture of Louis Armstrong. He's in that flow state. He's just played something that must have sounded really awesome. We've got Billie Holiday. Oh yeah, that was great. Well, even while we're having that sort of experience, we can notice that's happening. The same thing is true, though, if we're in that self-conscious place where we're being self-debasing and we're judging ourselves and making ourselves wrong and a bad person. That was that first character I introduced you to. But it's also true in that non-judgmental space, that second character I showed you, where we're noticing both the good and the bad that we're doing, or the things that are sounding better, or the things that are need improvement. And we're not making ourselves bad or wrong. We're just being honest. That's really the kind of space we want to rehearse from, so that we can get to that flow state when we're performing or even practicing, right? So with those things in mind, I'm going to now turn it over to Karin, who's going to talk a little bit about how we can work with that.
One thing that Tawnya talks about in this book is that sometimes we have gotten into habits where we think we can motivate ourselves through negative thoughts, that it actually will be encouraging and helpful to us to get in the practice room and get it done if we are mean to ourselves. The problem is that that can lead to some of these fight, flight, freeze responses. And so we're suggesting that there really is a better way to motivate ourselves to practice and improve. So here are some of these ideas. So if we take these witnesses that Tawnya introduced to you and take a statement that we might say in the practice room, and I would invite each of you right now to think of some statement that maybe isn't so kind. I have one that I hear myself say a lot. Here's Chester, my cello back here. When I'm playing my cello, I often may say, oh, I always miss that shift. And so even before that shift comes, I'm already thinking about that shift. And guess what? We have obeying brains. Whatever we tell our brains, they say, oh, that's what you want me to do? Okay, I'll do that. So if I'm continually telling myself, I always miss that shift, guess what? My brain's going to say, okay, let's do it. I'll find a way to make that possible. That's not what we want. So if you take a self-conscious statement like, I always miss that shift, and maybe think about what that might sound like if you said something else, like a non-judgmental statement where there's no good or bad, it's just facts. Might be something like, when I breathe, I shift more accurately. So I'm not judging, I'm just saying what is. So from self-conscious, I always miss that shift, to non-judgmental, when I breathe, I shift more accurately. So you can think of some statement you might make that is self-conscious or judgmental and change it to a non-judgmental statement where it's just being a teacher, being a compassionate teacher to yourself. And maybe if this were the creator witness, you might have a thought or not. You're just having a feeling. But if you had words for that and wanted to practice those words, it might be something like, my arms are free and flowing. And if you're telling yourself that over and over again, then you're creating a new pattern of thought for yourself. And then if you have this observer witness, who's that overmind, in other words, just kind of being aware of what's happening and what you're thinking, you might ask yourself, how am I shifting today? How am I thinking today? And just getting into a habit that way. So it's fun on micro levels to just catch yourself saying things. And rather than judging yourself for thinking those things, just saying, curious, I wonder what this would be like if I changed my language. Mm-hmm. What might I say instead?
Right. And this is one of those things, you hear like talks, and you're like, oh, great, one more thing I have to think about. But actually, that's not true because you're already practicing something now. You're already practicing certain thoughts and you probably have thought patterns. The trick here is just using the overmind to notice the thought patterns, and that gives you the power to change them to something that is more supportive of your own learning. Another technique that we talk about in the book is the idea of restoring. Now, you're at home, you're practicing, you may have a little bit more time for reflection than you normally would when we're running around to rehearsals and doing lots of things. This is a great time for some self-reflection, and likely you've been doing that already. But this is an interesting opportunity you might take. It's called restoring. I'm going to give you an example of a restory that I have done with part of my own story. And then I'm going to just invite you to think after this talk about a story that you might work with. So here is an example of a story that I used to tell. All right, these are short, don't worry. All right, in 6th grade, I performed a solo for my studio teacher's recital. I was proud of my performance because I knew that it was the best I had ever played the piece. Following the recital, my mother said, "Wow, it's too bad you missed those notes in the middle section. And wow, you really need to work on your intonation." She did that without mentioning anything that I did well. I felt angry, and as if someone had punched me in the stomach. All the good feelings I had were now replaced by the feeling that I had not performed well at all. Now, even when I read that to you, I feel pretty gross. I mean, I remember what it feels like, you know, when those sorts of things had happened to me. And I don't, you know, it brings my energy down. But a re-story is moving from that self-conscious or that negative sort of story into one that's more factual and honest and non-judgmental. So I'm going to read a different version of the same story, which is also true. In the 6th grade, I performed a solo for my studio teacher's recital. I was proud of my performance because I knew that it was the best that I'd ever played that piece. Although my mother thought she was helping me to improve by pointing out the minor flaws in my performance, my teacher noticed that I played the piece with a greater sense of confidence and was more expressive than I'd been in rehearsals. Several of the students in the studio came up to me and complimented aspects of my performance. While my mother didn't choose the best way to encourage me, I do recognize that she was trying to help me improve my intonation. I also know that I did my very best performance that day. I know that I created the best music I could at that time, and that the recital was evidence that I was improving and accomplishing my goals. As I look back at this recital, I am proud of my 6th grade self.
Go Tawnya! Woo! Yeah, that's
so
great.
You can see though that clearly you can feel the difference. The energy is different, the emotion is different. Both stories are true. Notice that in the first story, I was only focusing on what would make me feel horrible. In the second story, I allowed space for other facts to inform my story. And I'm choosing to practice remembering the whole story rather than just the horrible part. That I'm not saying to make up things. You need to be honest about them, but it's about how we look at those things and how they've shaped us and how they have helped us to grow. That's important.
Very inspiring. So before we go to our second part, we thought we'd have a little interlude. I don't know how many of you are aware of Amy Cuddy's power poses, but definitely check out her TED Talks about power poses. In general, the idea is that even the way you hold your body makes a difference. And so, in other words, if I am tucking myself or standing like this, oh, look, we've got nice visuals there, Tawnya. So if I'm crossing my legs and kind of crossing my arms like this and leaning over, I'm making myself small. Although if I open up my arms like Louis Armstrong was, and maybe have a stance like this where I have my hands on my hips, I'm making myself look big. Going back to our animal friends, animals go like this when they're protecting themselves, when they're in danger. But when they are alpha, when they are the king of the forest or whatever it might be, they make themselves big. This is literally changing the chemistry in our bodies when we do this. According to Amy Cuddy's research, if I hold this position for 2 minutes, I am literally changing the levels of testosterone and cortisol in my body, making me feel stronger, bigger, more empowered. Whereas if I do this, when I protect and tuck, I'm doing the opposite. So I hope you will try this on your own. It has been so amazing for me, even when doing presentations like this. If I start like this, I'm going to be shaking, I'm going to be unsure of myself, even in my thoughts. But if I stand like this before, for even just 2 minutes, I feel like a bigger person. As a cellist, this makes a difference. When I find myself only using half of the bow, I realize I'm protecting. And if I can bring myself to breathe out, and I breathe from my belly, not from my chest, breathing here is where I have power. So allowing the stomach to rise and fall, and allowing the carbon dioxide to get out of my system, then I'm able to open up and have more of a full bow. We do know when we shake that we're holding in carbon dioxide, and just breathing out, allowing ourselves, can help us shake less by breathing. It's amazing. So power poses are awesome. Breathing from the belly, awesome stuff. So definitely check out that TED Talk.
Okay. Okay, and now we're going to move to what do we do when it's time for us to come back together as a community and to make music together. I know we're all excited for that.
Yes.
Hopefully we can do that safely very soon. We'll keep sending that out to the universe. So creating supportive rehearsal spaces. The idea for this is to now take some of these ideas that we've been talking about and how we're retraining maybe some of our negative thoughts into more honest and non-judgmental talks to ourselves. How can we change that now and create that in a rehearsal space? Now, how many people have come out of a performance or come off stage and immediately they turn to their stand partner and they say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I blew it at measure 24. Or I noticed that my intonation is really horrible today.
Ooh, energy.
Right. But we do this, right? How many, come on, we've all done that, or we've seen someone do that, right? We're trying to own it so other people don't judge us, probably, right?
Yeah.
So we can change this climate, though. We don't have to keep practicing this negative way of relating to one another. Instead, because what we're doing is we're sending the message to our stand partner that we're also judging their performance just like we're judging ours. Yeah.
So even though it's something we do as a defense mechanism, remember the fight, flight, freeze? It's kind of one of those fight things we do when we're being defensive and saying, oh, don't attack me because I already know what I did wrong.
Right.
But actually what we're doing is saying that there's judgment in the air, that we're judging and maybe creating a space that isn't as safe, when really it's just a defensive thing. So let's stop the pattern.
Right. There are lots of things we can do to change that. I mean, for example, in this situation, I could say, whew, all right, maybe next week when we're rehearsing, I would really love it if we went over 24 a couple more times. I need a little bit more time to sort that out. And if you could help me with that, I would really appreciate that. What a different sort of thing that is. You're still owning that you know that you've messed up, but you're not making yourself bad or wrong. You're not judging yourself. You're just saying, I want to keep improving. What a wonderful sort of energy to send out to everyone that I know I need improvement. You're just creating an open space. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit more right now.
And I love what you just said, Tawnya, because there's a actual tangible thing that you're working on rather than I suck, I can't shift. You're saying, I think it would help me if at rehearsal 24, we practiced a couple of measures before, and I'm going to practice breathing and, so having specific ways to work through specific things. Yeah. We're not saying give up and just be happy and everything's wonderful. or just settle for not getting the shift. Not at all. What we're saying is there are more positive ways, more compassionate ways to get actually maybe even higher quality,
Right.
because it's free and expressive.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so here we go.
Yeah.
So we're drawing a little bit here from Joan Wink's critical pedagogy. This is an approach of really naming issues, reflecting upon them, and acting. And this is intended for any sort of microaggressions that we might experience that go beyond rehearsal spaces. For instance, issues of racism, issues of homophobia, anything that might happen when you're in a situation where someone says something, or you say something, something is said or done that is a microaggression, something hurtful, maybe isn't blatant, but kind of just makes another human being feel less than.
Digs.
Yeah. So little things that could be said, or nonverbal language. And what Joan Wink is suggesting is that when we start to have that yuck feeling for whatever situation it is, in rehearsal or beyond, we first name it and say, wait, why am I feeling this way? What's happening? Oh, it was this moment. And then we reflect upon it. Why was this said? Was it really intended this way? And then we can act and say, hey, I just heard what you said. And if we go back to the example we had before, you were talking about how you sucked in this one spot. And you know what? I messed up 2 measures before that. And now I'm wondering, were you thinking that about me too?
Oh, no, of course not.
Right. So then we can talk through it and say, I wonder if there's a better way. Here's maybe we could just work through this. And this doesn't have to be any cheesy thing, but really just saying, hey, wait, here's how I felt. How about we do this instead? So that's the approach: name, reflect, act.
Okay. Another source that I think is really helpful is actually Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication. It's an excellent book. This book has been applied to sort of peacemaking and mediation work all over the world. And it's been applied in education and different things. I think it would be wonderful to apply to rehearsal spaces. So the idea behind a lot of Rosenberg's work is related to what Karin was just talking about. It's a thinking through of when someone speaks something to you, and it's also about how you speak to someone else. So, so clearly expressing how I am without blaming or criticizing. So remember, remember I was talking about that self-conscious voice was blaming and criticizing. It was just, right. But that non-judgmental person is that, or character witness, is someone who's now just saying the facts without blaming or criticizing. So that's the first thing. So that kind of reinforces what we've already talked about a little bit. And then empathically receiving how you are without hearing blame or criticism. And that's kind of what Karin was talking about when we were talking about measure 24. She was calling me out a little bit for being self-debasing myself, because she was saying, wait, are you also judging me? But maybe she was asking me that because empathically, she wasn't sure if I was judging her or if I was judging myself. So sometimes you can tell that someone's just being hard on themselves, but not necessarily hard on you. Sometimes it's both, right? You can kind of feel it empathically. So to just stop for a moment and think, how am I reading this? And if you're not sure, that's where that communication is especially important. But understanding that sometimes people are nervous and they say things that they don't necessarily mean. And I think when we're in high stakes performance situations, sometimes we can certainly be guilty of doing that sort of thing. So that's why communicating about what we hear or what we say is so super important. So here are some examples. So here's so we didn't get a superior rating at contest because the percussion section screwed up and one of the clarinets squeaked. Okay, you could say something like that, or instead you could say what you're really feeling, which is, I'm disappointed that we did not get a superior rating at contest, right? Another example, you always put the blame on others. Maybe we should listen to the recording and see how many times your section messed up, right? So someone angry about something that's happened. Or, I understand that you're disappointed in our ensemble's performance. So that could be the person responding, okay? So there are different ways we can say the same thing and honor how we're feeling. I feel statements are super important when we're doing this kind of work. Okay.
That's so inspiring. I have a lot to take from this slide. Wow. Okay.
So there's 4 parts to the nonviolent communication process. So the first is that I state what I observe that does not contribute to my well-being. So like Karin was noticing that my criticism of myself was not contributing to her well-being, right? She was saying that in that example, right, of course. So, although it happens in life too. So, but it's important to practice nonviolent communication, especially when you're in relationships with people, especially relationships you want to keep. So, but stating what you observe that does not contribute to your well-being. So she was noticing my self-judgment was not contributing to her well-being. So she made a statement about that. Stating how you feel. Again, I was saying how I feel statements are super important. So like, so I'm going to change the example here for a minute. So I observe that I could use a couple of examples here. I observe that that joke that someone made actually seems more like a put down, right? So that's sometimes people make jokes when they're nervous or there's socially awkward moments, and you know, but it's maybe it's a dig instead of just a joke. So I state that I observe that joke made me feel uncomfortable, right? You could say that joke made me feel uncomfortable. And then you can say what you need or value that causes these feelings. So I need a safe space where people don't put down others to be able to be my best musical self. So you state what you need. You need a safer space where people aren't putting each other down with nasty jokes, okay? And then you request. Now, you can't make someone create a safe space, but you can say, I request that we refrain from making jokes like that about one another when we're rehearsing. And so you've made a request. That's what Karin was talking about before, about actions. The requests are, you know, stating how you feel to another person, telling them what you need, and then requesting an alternative are what we can do with those when we're coming up with that action statement. So here's some examples of when we observe something and we state what we've observed. That's more factual, as opposed to evaluation. Now, in music, we've been evaluated like crazy. Contests, adjudications, you know, auditions. We've been evaluated a lot, but that's evaluation here is when evaluation is personal and it's about you being bad. It's that self conscious, really judgmental sort of evaluation is what I mean by right now. So if you look up here on the slide, you can see the first example is, did anyone notice intonation issues at letter B? Why might this be happening? See, I've observed that there were some intonation issues at letter B. Yeah, so an example you could do is like say, Karin, you were very sharp at letter B again. How many times do you need to tell you to stop overblowing, right?
Oh. I'm a cellist.
Right, so if you were a brass player, okay. So the example here is, you know, you could be really cutting. You could say something really horrible to someone else and blame them for being wrong or screwing up, right? Or you could just say, did anyone notice? Because you're still drawing attention to the problem. You're still going to work to fix it. But the way you say it is really hugely different. There's another example there. Would you agree that we weren't quite together? So let's say we had some rhythm precision issues. Or you could blame someone. You could say, David, you have to listen to the bass, right? You know, so that doesn't work, right? I mean, sometimes when you're angry, it feels good to let out some steam, but that's not the best place to
Put
do
it into Shostakovich 8.
Yeah, right. Okay, so again, it's all in how you observe what's going on. So again, if you're trying to communicate better with other people, keep it in observation mode and not evaluation mode.
Okay, all right. Well, We hope this has been helpful. We just want to remind you that all the instrument maintenance you do, the most important instrument you have is you. And we hope that you will become a virtuoso in non-judgmental self-talk. And of course, as you're doing instrument maintenance right now, be sure to wash your hands. So we hope this has been helpful to you today. Please feel free to reach out to us. This is a short and condensed version of what we typically do, and we're happy to talk further with any of you about a longer version. And we wish you a wonderful, wonderful summer. Take care.
Take care. Be well.
Bye.